Okay. So, Technical Steering Committee for 4th of June 2025. Let me just start with apologies from Nick, Barry, Neil Davies, and Johnny Kelly for this session. There are a few. We haven't heard from Duncan Coote, but so. There were a couple of actions just to follow up on from last time. So there were a few. The screenshot doesn't include the actions that have been done, but just the ones that are still outstanding. So, are we still intending to do a write-up of the pros and cons of the KES agent repo migration, or are we wanting to drop that? It's been several weeks.
Could we prod Duncan C about that?
Sure.
I think it was you, Adam, and Duncan were going to write up pros and cons, and Johnny was quite interested in that as well. So if we could prod Duncan C, and hopefully he will have some interest in doing that. But if we don't have people to write both sides, then I don't see that we can produce such a document.
TSC Remit will cover the proposal for parameter committee changes to memory limits. I understand that report is still due to come out, but the TSC will review it when it is released. Is that right, Kevin?
Yeah. So there's a parameter committee meeting. We've recommended to do this in 2 stages to avoid triggering any constitutional questions, and B, to test the process. Alex, I'm still waiting for some information from you before we can construct the metadata, but everything is essentially, it should be more or less ready, Duncan. So it's just a case of waiting for a bit of information from Alex Moser, and then we can progress that. And I'll give people a heads up before we push the action.
Sure.
I have a question here. Is this then, can we bring that to the SPO call tomorrow? I think it's a topic there too, right? And that's the status, basically.
Yes, absolutely, Sebastian. We can raise that. We can discuss that then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't think there'll be anything particularly to concern the SPOs.
No, just ahead. I think Matt Capps asked about that being a bullet or a topic, and whether there is any news from the TSC on that. And basically, this one looks good and is just waiting for be put on chain, right? This one and the other stuff we discussed last time, where we are more overseeing the process being followed rather than the TSC deciding on kind of the ledger change needed and so on, of the SIP 50 stuff.
Yeah,
which is another parameter, but more earlier stage, bigger impact kind of change, obviously.
Yeah. So the question there would be to provide input, obviously, to SIP 50. It's being progressed by, sorry, I've forgotten who is progressing it, but it's being progressed independently anyway. And the real question would be how it was put into effect. So if it was considered to be a good change, how would it be affected?
Yeah, as we identified already, this is a ledger change, actually. It's not the parameter change only. That particular topic from, I think, 2 weeks ago or so, a TSC meeting. I think that's just shouldn't have brought it up too much, but that's good.
Is this on the L parameter?
That's
that
right.
was that, yeah.
Okay.
Right. So it's about changing the pledge formula, Duncan.
Mhm.
So there's a good discussion at the parameter committee with the proposers about this. Essentially, the only consideration they had thought about was the impact on civil protection. But it did look as if there was be some knock-on economic effect on state pool operators. So I can see there being quite a lot of pushback from SPOs on this. If that isn't addressed, essentially you're making it perhaps uneconomic for quite a few existing SPOs to run their pools. So the effect might actually be to reduce civil protection in some sense rather than improve it. Right? If we end up losing state pool operators from the ecosystem, they're providing effective civil protection. So it looks more finely balanced than you might expect from the original discussion.
Yeah.
And the discussion is to be had on the SIP, right? SIP 50 has been kind of revived, I think it was the term, and that is to be had there. And if SPOs have concerns, this is the place to go.
So we should certainly mention that in the call, because that
exactly, that's the call to action, basically, right? So if you
right.
want to know more about this, right, this TSC has discussed, it needs to go through a SIP because it's a ledger change we identified following the process there, and
I
interesting.
which ones have I? Oh. Apologies. I'll have a read through. Should I take an action then in that case to via the channels that we have at Intersect and the X-Count and things, direct people to SIP 50 then and encourage participation? Is that the?
Yeah, I think what we could probably do is, if we've got an X account, right, so we can tweet about it, we can point people at it, and make people aware of the discussion. And as you were saying, Sebastian, we can also cover it at the SPO call tomorrow.
Are you going to be there?
Yes.
I'm not sure if I'm available, so.
So yes, Matt's invited me to be there.
Okay.
So is that Alex or Seb? Sorry,
that was Sebastian.
Yeah. I could just be a backup on the SPO call, but if Kevin is there, he's more equipped in knowing the status there.
Gotcha. I did reach out to Ricky, albeit I'll admit that was today, so he's had almost no notice, asking him about IOE's position on whether that would be considered part of their scope for development, and also if there had been any recommendations on coordinating. But naturally, Ricky just needs a little bit of time to get some answers on that. On you go, Ricky. Sorry to answer on your behalf.
Nope. No, it's fine. I just actually reached out to Carlos, who's the PM on this, and he has answered. He does expect that it should be part of that SEPO incentives scheme. So yeah, we think it is covered.
So we have someone who would implement the change if it is decided to be good to have on the SIP and coming from that discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is something that would need a hard fork, of course, since it's a ledger change. Looking at what's being proposed, it looks like quite a simple change to the incentives scheme. So technically, it's probably not a lot of work, but we still have to go through all the socialization, etc., for the hard fork. So it would be something probably to bundle with other things.
I think Jared called it soft forks, which is it doesn't change transactions being more or less valid, but it changes it to the rule, like the ledger rules of the. I think in this case the reward calculation, right?
Well, I think we would need a hard fork, Sebastian, because otherwise some state pool operators will get different rules.
Yeah, so I mean, SIP84 describes how ledger changes are to be processed and classified and also discussed, right? So how it should be evolved. And I think there was a distinction between a hard fork and a soft fork, both being protocol version bumps, which require coordinated enabling, right? In that sense, so everyone should support it. Just a distinction between whether it makes more transactions valid, which would be a hard fork, a change to transaction format, for example, and there is this other classification, which is more of a soft fork, but still a kind of an upgrade, that similar upgrade, yeah.
Yeah,
I kind of like the explanation there. Just wanted to maybe I'll just include the link here again.
we absolutely want all the nodes to be working to the same rules. That's it.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Adam, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, so just a couple of points of order. One, we don't have quorum today, so I wouldn't advise that we take any formal stance from the Twitter account since we don't have a quorum of the members to approve that. But maybe at least just something informational would be okay. Just saying that this discussion is ongoing and exists. So here's where you can go and join in if you're interested. But make sure we're opinion neutral. And then for two, do we have any plan or intent, not only for this SIP 50, but also when these things come up in the future, to actually judge accurately community sentiment and appetite for these things, rather than a handful of noisy Twitter accounts potentially making mountains out of molehills? Because this would have a knock-on impact on every single delegator, as well as SPOs, because the amount of rewards that their pool is generating based on where their delegation is at. So that this is not a minor change. Let's just add it to smooth some feathers and sweep a problem under the rug. That this does have large, I guess, monetary or economic impact to how the Cardano blockchain as a whole operates. So I think it should not be taken quite so lightly, that if they are loud enough that it gets swept through the CIP process, that IOG will begin work immediately. I think we need to think about how we formalize as an ecosystem these processes to actually judge whether there is real community intent for these upgrades. We've seen that there's strong appetite for Laos, and that's been backed up with on-chain voting. We don't have that same kind of indicator with this proposal so far.
Yeah, so putting it to an info action, for example, would be the right thing to do.
would that mean suggest a change to SIP 84 about evolution of the ledger, which kind of covers reward calculation stuff? That means any change to incentives should imply an info action or temperature check, whatever we deem to be a good one.
Well, you have to remember that SIP 84 was written prior to on-chain governance coming into effect, right? So it was still the IOG show at the time in terms of what was going to make it into the ledger or not. And so now we are in this brave new world. So part of that ongoing discussion that we're having about refactoring CIP 84 is probably how we go about achieving community consensus on what qualifies for forks, and just kind of documenting what the expected behavior is. It may be enough that if IOG proposes something and then the other node implementers agree, then we're good. It could be that, if Sebastian raises an idea and everybody thinks it's a good idea, we just go with it. Or it could be that we need to do an info action, what do we expect as an ecosystem? But we need to set new precedent now in this new era. And that's the kind of conflict that we're running into, is nobody has necessarily taken the lead yet. And so everybody's just kind of waiting for somebody to take that lead before they move in a certain direction.
Yeah, so there are two ways of doing this, Adam. One is to put forward individual changes. So so here we could just put forward our proposal for a change to SIP 50, use that to gauge sentiment and support. The other thing that needs to be done is when a hard fork is being enacted, we need to collate the functionality that's being introduced with the hard fork and to obtain support for that. So it could be there are actually two stages here. One is for the individual work item, but then you might need us at a later stage say, and now what we're proposing to do is in the Dijkstra hard fork or whatever it is, collect this functionality and be more formal about that.
I mean, the second part we definitely will have, right? This is covered by SIP 1694. Any change, any protocol version, I think, bump, right? The major version bump need to be coming from a governance action, no?
Yeah, that's the stage at which you confirm it, Sebastian.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very late stage thing.
Very late stage thing. What you want is an early stage thing where people are exposed to the functionality that you're implementing. So you don't get to the stage where you're saying take it or leave it. Rather,
and also before spending a lot of money on implementing it, right? And then money to take it out again.
Ideally, because otherwise you certainly do run the risk that you spend an enormous amount of money on some implementation, and then you get to the stage where the SVA say, well, actually, we don't want this, right? I mean, if the CARES agent was having some on-chain impact, we might be, for example, doing that at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, because the other impact is things that are, I can't remember if they got proposed for funding or not, but rewards calculators, all of this stuff would need to be updated to be accurate across the ecosystem. So there is kind of knock-on effects. There are other protocols that are based on staking revenue being part of their customer feedback cycle or value proposition cycle. So again, lots of maybe things that we're not thinking of, the knock-on effects of that need to be accurately reflected across the ecosystem before we dive into these things. And so this is, again, just kind of, it's just like the KES agent. It puts a sharp point on it because it's the first time we've had to approach these things in this new era. So I don't think there's necessarily right or wrong answers. It's just we need to be real careful with how we consider it.
Yeah, but absolutely, early communication is critical, Adam.
I can take that away to speak with an intersect to see what's in place currently, and it's not going to be something that we solve today, but it's a really good point. So are we happy to move on this topic? Yeah. I guess this is slightly out of date now, so do we want to go through then the projects that have been put under core as part of the budget process that have been approved by DREPs? Kevin, I know you've gone through these and given your viewpoint on this. Do you want to share your thoughts then? And
yes, exactly. My thoughts were that it turned out to be much more complicated than I expected, because I was trying to apply the previously agreed definition of core roadmap, and when I worked through the proposals, quite a few of them are, as I said, referring to layer 2 or they're referring to tooling, and it's not completely clear whether these should be classified as core or not. So the early stage items, I could reach a decision. So Starstream, that would have to be core because it's a new VM that would need to be on chain. Hardware wallet maintenance, we'd agreed was part of the core scope. Sustaining a lightweight Cardano data node, I thought could be core, is likely to be core. The RTXO, UTXO RPC, sustaining Cardano blockchain integration, I couldn't figure out while I was looking at it. So we can go through this. Then you get into things which are are to do with basically tooling to support core development. Okay, and there's an argument that says, well, this could be OSC, so it could be under OSC remit because it's about tooling. But arguably, you also need to support the tooling to do the development for anyone who is doing core node development. Okay, so two different interpretations you could place there as to whether tooling so if we're supporting tooling to support development, is that TSC remit or not? So I felt that was something that needed to be discussed, and that also applied to the M Labs tooling, Ben. So you're referring to this core tools. So the question is this TSC remit or?
I can say when we put it in, we expected it to be under open source remit. It is interesting that Intersect wants all of the committees to reevaluate their remit, given that these proposals are dependent on previous definitions, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah. But to say that this is part of the discussion we have to have about the TSC remit. So if we're supporting core development, if the OSC opts not to support some piece of tooling, but other development depends on it, what do we then do, Ben? So there's a difference between tooling to support essential core development and tooling to support other types of development, I think. And Plutarch, I would say is core because it's depended on by a number of projects. So my interpretation of that was that Plutarch could be considered core. Again,
if we're looking at expanding the definition of core to include things that are built on top of the node, rather than just things that enable usage of the node, then certainly a lot of libraries suddenly qualify like that. It might double the LOC under core, let's say.
Yeah.
Or more than double.
I'm looking at Christian
or
here.
Possibly more than double. I'm not sure what the LOC count is for the node right now. I imagine it's 1 million lines plus.
But it's there will be more. The further we go out from, I think, the core network parts, right? Kind of the peer-to-peer and the nodes connecting to each other, the more diversity you will see, right? There is more transaction building libraries out there than there is, I think, consensus implementations, and similar in all directions, I guess.
Yeah, Christian, you've raised your hand. What's the OSC?
So, yeah, OSC is still defining kind of how they're gonna do the payout and the tooling program, but kind of the remit is what projects within core are a part of project SBOMs, and then the adherence or adoption of certain projects that underlying infrastructure layer as to what should be supported. Now, there is, we're obviously going to support things that are tooling built on top of core that aligns with TSC stuff too, if it doesn't align with y'all's budget and it has to be picked up. But there's also the other projects like Lucid Evolution is a good one that could apply to the tooling. So.
Yeah, so we won't necessarily get the sharp distinction, Christian, which is why in this call, which is why I was proposing to have a focused discussion just on this topic, so we could actually go through the items and agree, yeah, this is definitely core, this is definitely not core. Sorry, or this is TSC, this is definitely not TSC. Adam.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question becomes what is the point of this exercise? Is it who needs to volunteer to be on the oversight and approval of milestones committees? Like what are we trying to accomplish? Because all of these individual entities have proposed their own workflows and everything. It's not as though we're going to go and tell them that they have to change their project or otherwise refactor like that. We've been bypassed as a committee in favor of going directly to the DREPs for their approval of this described work process. So I mean, what are we trying to decide here? What happens if all the committees go, I don't want that one, and throw up their hands? Like, is Intersect going to no longer support that proposal? We've already said that we wouldn't have that kind of veto power. So this may be an exercise in futility until we know what Intersect is planning on doing in terms of the oversight of the milestones, rather than, you know, us virtue signaling whether or not we believe that something is core to the Cardano ecosystem.
Can I back that point up of Adam's, to be honest, that I think there's two ways of doing it. We can either look at what's within core and of all the project proposals, or we look at the, you know, more holistically to say, what is it the TSC is doing and where do we think that our input sits? And then once we've got that aligned, then we ask the question of, okay, which projects does that apply to and what do we need to do? Which I don't want to, maybe that's a more productive use of this call, which was what I was going to suggest earlier, that we have that latter discussion.
Yeah, let me just finish off, because there's some things which I identified as being clearly not core. These would be things like the eternal maintenance. So the rationale being eternal is only one of many light wallets. So why would we consider that to be core? So again, there's a distinction there to be made. If there are many tools, then why would we consider that to be within TSC Remit? Same goes for the Explorer, C Explorer. Ledger app rewrite, that's again, it's web tooling. So there are quite a few things like that. And then you get to the ZK fold, the ZK bridge. So the question is whether these would be within TSC scope or not, because they're certainly moving over to layer 2 enabling all libraries.
May I go next? I think I have my hand raised. It's not clear to me what it means to be core or not core, but I think it's also the exercise to finding this out now. Okay. What I think is, why do these, so these are like the 25 to be funded projects by Intersect. Now, Intersect has its various committees who have all their purpose, and the technical steering committee sounds like it should be like concerning themselves with the technical viability or done well in terms of technical purpose, technical sense, right? Whereas maybe open source is more conscious about, is it done in a way benefiting the whole ecosystem and open source methodology, and there's other committees probably which can vouch for the what's it called, the regular following of like what they promise to be like the scope in terms of just budgeting wise maybe, or process wise. But and within this, right, I mean, each of these committees can serve their purpose, and I think our remit is rather in, and it's more important certainly in areas which kind of affect the overall Cardano protocol, but it can also be viable or important, as you said, in layer 2s, right, that we can have, we get input, or we can be providing input in some of these things, as they could affect the protocol or the Cardano network as large from a technical standpoint. And it's rather, probably all of them are candidates for oversight, but all for TSC and all for open source. Some of them are more relevant. Some are also much bigger in kind of scope and money ultimately. And some are less important, and all of the committees will probably need to kind of prioritize a bit on what they look most in, and the demand will be different, right? So if one project might have a bigger demand of like guidance from the TSC, where others maybe don't need any guidance, and that's just also perfectly fine.
I'll just jump in real fast. I like Sebastian's idea. I think it's just from the smart contract standpoint, you need a RACI, who's the accountable party. So maybe you assign that one committee, but they depend on the other committees for feedback before they can approve milestones, stuff like that. And to answer the other question, I think core Cardano was defined by the repo migration that we did. So it's 2030 repos. So that's kind of what we're calling core. Everything outside of or gets added under intersect to that banner goes through the evaluation process to change it. But yeah, we just simple definition, at least for now, unless we change it.
Well, I think that's been part of the problem with intersect, and no offense to anybody else in the room, but the people that have come from the IOG and Haskell's side of the development process of Cardano to date, is that there's this concept that only the Haskell node and its various components can be considered core to the ecosystem, and everything else is just nice to have extras, although things like the libraries that help users build transactions and the wallets, if those don't exist, we don't have a financial ecosystem, and so there's no value, and all of this money is just magic internet points in a database that don't really matter. So to take that, I'm going to stick my head in the sand, and if it's not Haskell, it's no longer valid for consideration to core, or if it's not owned under intersect, it can't be core, is a little bit of a reductive and misleading label that has been applied to the existing ecosystem architecture from the founding of intersect, that continues to be pervasive. And so I feel like it feels shitty, excuse my language, when you're a developer that's been working hard for years in this ecosystem and you're told, no, you're not actually important enough to rise to our level of remit because you're not one of these Haskell libraries. You don't actually touch the ledger. You're just responsible for a huge chunk of the financial activity going on in this ecosystem, but you're actually not that important. So we need to be really careful with how we phrase this, are you core, are you not core, kind of labeling.
Yeah, we might need different terminology, Adam. So if core is sensitive, maybe we need different terminology to describe where the remit lies.
Is it too simplistic to say? Because the problem is that if we're defining something as core, what we're saying is that there needs to be some sort of central body, the TSC intersect, that is coordinating that, because there is only one version of it. I mean, is it too simplistic to say that anything that needs a hard or a soft fork is core, or that may do? And because one of the things that, when it comes to TSC Remit, that no one's really challenged, and I think still seems to have universal agreement, is that the TSC coordinates hard forks. And therefore, anything that might form part of a hard fork automatically is going to need TSC oversight to some degree, is my logic to that. But I don't know if that's too simplistic.
I think by that definition, there's only two line items that would even rise to that level, and it's IOG and potentially Starstream, which is not intending to have intersect as an admin anyway. So they're intending to be outside of, TSC's reach, so to speak.
I think you'd have things which are within remit, Adam, even if they're not within reach, right? So,
well, I mean, remit for what? We're going to sit around and discuss whether or not Seba and his team are doing a good job, even though we have no oversight of their funding, or whether or not, like,
no.
What is our remit then in terms of that proposal?
Yeah, no. What I meant is there are things that could be in scope, even though in practice they're not. So, and there might also be implications from. So although Starstream is not under Intersect's control, it definitely would have an impact on things like hard fork coordination, etc. If it's implemented. So it's something that would definitely have to be considered by this group.
What is this list again? Can you remind me? Because it's in this list, and I assumed that this is a list of kind of intersect aggregated proposals, off-chain voted, and then it would be it's kind of enabled to intersect these budgets, which kind of would be a direct administration, at least, connection. Of course, there is other important work
It
on the
is,
network,
with
which
the exception, it
Yeah.
is, with the exception that Starstream submitted their budget to the Intersect process, but indicated that they did not want Intersect to be their
Okay.
administrator. They just wanted to be socialized as part of the Intersect process. So it's
Okay.
one of the weird gotchas in this whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, even with that, thanks for clarifying. But I mean, we should be interested in kind of being involved in also other node implementations. Although I'm sympathetic with the understanding, okay, spec and protocol and hard fork logic, protocol design is everything, but the implementation is maybe out of scope already. This is maybe one cut to take. But if the reference implementation is in, we should also be interested in kind of interacting at least, or having a kind of a good working relationship with people working on other node implementations, and that being, I think, another bigger project right now is Amaro, right, which is not in this list, and because it's not in this kind of process, but it's also similarly not going to be directly administrated through Intersect, but still we could be interested in kind of interacting with projects like that, just because of their technicality, right? Kind of affecting or changing the network protocol and being quite core in that sense, quite centered to the overall business of running the technical network.
Christian, were you
So but
next?
this list is not complete. That's understood, and there is maybe other stuff. It serves as a discussion basis, I understand right now.
Yeah, it's just so the reason for raising was basically looking at this list. It starts to raise the question about, well, what is actually the remit? What should we be focusing on? What is generally within scope, even if we're not, as Adam's saying, administering all of the work items. And the discussion we've then been having about, well, is the scope broader than just the reference implementation? I think is also very important, and we had feedback from the community that it should be. So the community considered Amaro should be, or we had feedback from some community members that Amaro should be within our scope, even though Amaro wasn't looking for Intersect funding.
If I may, just real fast, when we were originally doing the repo migration, I think it's important that we define what core is, so you have this distinguishing factor. There's a ecosystem architecture diagram Johnny Wynn put together a while back that we used to help do that determination. All the blue boxes on the first slide are what we considered core, but it does give you the hierarchy of how things are kind of integrated to give some food for thought as to what level you want to cut it when you say core.
Yeah, so I was involved in making this first cut, and just as I said, this is basically historic. So the cut we made at the time, Christian, was essentially what are the things that IOG is producing? Does it absolutely need to be able to operate a coherent ecosystem? So that was essentially where the cut was done, and it was all repos. So there's all of the repos that have been developed, but also all of the things that supported that development. So that was really where the definition.
I think you could still pull away at least the categories that these protocols fall in, and then also the adoption rates for being considered core, because with node diversity, those are going to become core layers across the board. And then we could determine what level you cut that off as you go up between building on Cardano versus building Cardano.
So again, the only one that is core is the IOG proposal.
And that's not
By this reductive logic,
Yeah.
the only one that
Yeah.
matches to this criteria is the IOG, and everything else is ancillary to the ecosystem. It's not really that critical. The blockchain
Then-
shall continue to work in an academic sense,
Yeah.
ergo it's fine. Stick our head in the sand and continue on, march on, little soldiers.
That's not what I'm getting at. Like, Amaru is something you could add on to this. Obviously, you need more adoption to go on over time, but it does integrate heavily into the Haskell node too, if I'm not mistaken. Does not?
No, it's using Midgard a lot, but Midgard, sorry. But another the question: what difference does it make, right? If it's core or not core, what different action or what different effect does it have onto our actions in regards to that or that team project, whatever? I think we shouldn't say no. We're not talking to you because you're not consider you core. This is exactly what we should not do, I believe, and this is also what you said before, Adam. We shouldn't be saying, yeah, we only talk to things which are core. No, there is maybe some portions or some projects which are kind of economically dependent on intersect kind of bundling efforts. Maybe there we have a direct close relationship, which is kind of inherited from the budgetary relationship. But the TSC's remit ideally shouldn't end where the money is flowing, right? It should rather be concerned with the network security, the protocol design, and kind of to make this whole thing as resilient, as decentralized as possible.
The trick with that is that we do need to draw our scope somewhere, and some of what you're describing, Seb, I think, does that not really sit within the product committee or the marketing committee, something like that, rather than obviously anything, as you say, security or technically focused should come under us, but otherwise we do risk sort of stretching ourselves quite thin, and that's the worry, given the and can I suggest, like, this is quite good conversation, but what we're doing is talking around, well, what is it that we are doing? Can I propose that we pivot towards this instead, which is my attempt at trying to pull together a coherent narrative across the TSC on where the members believe the responsibilities of the TSC lie. I've made this more high-level headlines of things that we've been involved with over the past 18 months. And it's a modified RACI matrix of whether we're responsible for executing the work, making decision, whether it's, whether we expect to be consulted or just being available to advise. This list is quite high level at the moment, but what I was keen to do was that if we can start to, rather than having these conversations which sort of go around and around, and can we get these put down, and we can see where we have consensus, and we can then start to actually write out what our responsibilities look like, or what we as the TSC believe where we can add value, I should say, to help take that to intersect. Is that something that this group would be happy to maybe spend the rest of the meeting, next 35 minutes, looking at?
I love the idea. I just want to, I like a few items which are already there, because I think it makes it easy to think about if they are kind of activities, we do this, but it's, we need to kind of detail, I think, some of the rows, but I think that's just, you probably said that security issues, what about them, right? Receive, track, resolve. The verb is quite important in each of these rows, but I'm happy. I think it helps a lot to kind of just collect and then see where we have considered. As you say, I think I like the exercise.
I think I'm keen for it to be fairly open at this stage and encourage. I've given you all a space to sort of share your thoughts, and you're right, Seb. When it comes to take roadmap creation, doing what? Are we, where do we see that being? We're not responsible for the final, for the final thing, nor are we probably responsible for publishing, but do we expect to be consulted with that? Do we, and in what way? Are we expecting are we looking for any sort of coordination with product committee and sort of any sort of sign off that we as a committee within Intersect buy into this? That sort of the two definitions of roadmap. Okay.
So one is aspirational, Duncan. So this is what we would like to do, and the other is pragmatic. This is what we are doing. Okay, and you can be referring to either of those. Now, the product committee is generally speaking aspirational, but the roadmap which is carried out needs to be pragmatic. So this one of the divisions, one of the distinctions that has to be clarified is exactly where does the boundary lie? Because if you're told, yes, we want to do something, you may find that what's being proposed is completely impossible. Okay, and the TSC's responsibility surely is to say, well, actually, this thing's being proposed. We understand you would like to do it, but actually you can't do it. What about this other thing instead? Or alternatively, it's a great thing to do, but there simply aren't the resources to do it. So it's not going to be on this year's roadmap, but it might be on next year's roadmap or when the resource becomes available. So there are these issues affecting the aspirational roadmap versus the pragmatic roadmap.
Yeah,
that's one of the confusions that I think we've got into with the community, because essentially the community thinks, oh, you've got this roadmap, you're absolutely going to carry out all of these things during 2025, for example, and that's not necessarily realistic.
Yeah, I think as Seb was saying, these are some very high level items, but I didn't want to create a list of 50 that you all have to put something against. So I've tried to keep them in broad, high level headline. What I'd imagine that we do is, for security issues, do we agree that we triage them? Are we responsible for making sure that they're carried out? Do we see ourselves responsible for putting communications out about that? When Seb says, to what extent, what does this mean? This is what I'm looking to try to tease out here. And that security piece, we can then get a number of lines under it to say, we're merely consulted throughout the whole process and we don't do anything actively within it, say, as an example. That's so this list will grow in length, but I wanted to start by just keeping it to a few headlines.
Yeah, I think it's more helpful if the things are too concrete, but then we have a concrete discussion around one thing. It's not exhaustive in the beginning. It will never be right away, right? So it's very helpful to dive in and say, okay, in this regards, do we agree on that we do exactly this? And then we can expand into the other areas and start discussions around, right? But if this thing is too vague, too big, we're in the same problem again, right? So what about the roadmap are we doing? So maybe we can find something concrete where we then maybe have quickly consensus on, and then we find more and more, and then we kind of test ourselves to the boundaries of our remit space, right? And maybe the more lower hanging fruits are really security issue related things, hard fork related things, right? So this is, I think, where we even have, I guess, working groups dedicated for that. I will understand. But we can enumerate really, okay, what is the TSC's purpose in this regards concretely? And it's as in proxy probably as one of its working groups or so, but
I want to give everybody here an opportunity to help shape this of where do you see the TSC giving value, what do you see its role, and I'm trying to find a way to help facilitate that, because otherwise the risk is that it'll simply be mandated. And so I agree that this will become more case by case, more solid, but I want to kind of start at this sort of high level and see, as you say, there'll be some very, I hope that we'll find some things that the vast majority of the committee can align on and that the board agrees with. Hard fork coordination is one that stands out, that if we all agree that that's something that, is on the TSC, that they're responsible for doing, great. We can then park that. We're not in any debate. We may need to revisit some things, as you say, case by case. This will be possibly a growing document throughout the year, and we encounter test cases, but can we get it nailed down at least at the start with a few things, and then we can move on to some of the more challenging pieces. Delivery sign-off, for example, and the TSC's role within that, I can imagine is going to be more challenging. And that's one that, but at least if we can get some of it nailed down, this is maybe something that we can grow, over time.
Yeah.
So
what is it? The targeted level of detail, is it more like what I just added, line 12? Is this too detailed? Or is this something we can see a bigger document to say, oh yeah, this is actually good, or is it should be more higher level in the end?
What I prefer for now is that you've all got probably not nearly enough space to light up your views in it. And so if you think that, the TSC should be responsible for submitting protocol parameter changes, put that in there, and we'll see, does anyone else put that? It's a point of discussion. If we can agree with bits, then it then goes into the list. We tick it saying, we believe that this is our responsibility, and we'd send it to the board to say, do you agree with this list and the description that we've put behind it?
Okay, so the ask is maybe asynchronously to add rows as we see fit, and then in the columns where basically our name stands, kind of say maybe in one word or in one of these, like in the legend, there is marks or so, right? What our role is about this. So it's kind of more we expand the space to see, okay, I see this activity, I read about it, I participated in it, I know about it, and I see ourselves being capable and responsible doing that.
Absolutely. So just to be,
row and column.
Just to be clear, what I was looking for with this is to, I picked out some of the major high-level activities. What I'm looking for is everybody to input their view of this is what the TSC's role is with it. So within the box there. So submitting protocol parameter change, is that something that we execute on that? That we, are informed on what the roadmap is that the product committee are going to publish, or we're going to be consulted on that. And then from there, anything that people are talking about, I'll go through this document and I'll create a number of extra rows, say, these are all the suggestions that have been put forward. And in the next, session, can we make some decisions to say, yes, this is what we are, and then we can go through that long list and start putting X and D and T, and so it gives a clear visual that we can share. That's kind of where I'm wanting to try to get to, so that we've got a tangible artifact that everyone can see, visually understand very quickly, and remove, the high levels of uncertainty we've been working with for the last few weeks. As an approach, is this something that's agreeable? I mean, there are many ways of doing this, but it was, for me, at least a way that we can maybe try to get a consensus.
Shall we try it?
Sure. We've got 25 minutes. I don't know if
Well, I was going to raise a procedural point. Are people okay continuing in the open session, or are there issues that people would like to raise in the closed session?
I need to jump soon, but I'm happy to do 1 or 2 examples now to get a feel of the level of detail. That would be good.
So let's remain in the open session.
Yeah, it's
Sure.
not going to be decisive right now. It's rather like what is the methodology or methods we're finding here, right?
Cool. Should we, Kevin, do you have an example you'd like to take to go through? I was wondering about hard fork coordination, since that's something that we've, there's a fair bit of experience there, and it's probably one of the more well understood ones.
Yeah. So what you want there, Duncan, is you just want to know what the process is?
I think so. Since it's the most well understood one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's actually quite it's interesting because it's evolving. Okay. So what's happened historically is Intersect has been caught in at the late stages of hard fork development, and what it's then done is to organize regular meetings which involve interaction between the developer teams and others who are involved in doing the deployment, including communications teams, etc. So typically, the coordination has started off being relatively infrequent, once a week, once every 2 weeks, or thereabouts, and essentially just keeping track of status. And then, as we get closer to the hard fork, so the tempo is increased. And one of the key decisions that has to be made by this group, one of the key recommendations rather, because the TSC has always taken the decision on whether to do a hard fork, whether to propose a hard fork action or not, is when we are in a status, when we're in state to be ready for a hard fork. So to inform that, the hard fork working group has constructed detailed readiness trackers covering all parts of the ecosystem, including wallets, exchanges, dApps, etc. So there's a lot of work involved in doing that coordination. Now, we were touching on this earlier. The situation we're moving towards is that there needs to be some discussion of the content of a hard fork. So what is the scope of the hard fork? And that now needs to happen in a public way. So rather than it simply being one developer team that's saying, yeah, we're going to have a hard fork, here's what's in the hard fork. What we now need to do is start to socialize that at an early stage, get community buy-in to the content, and then to get general information out about what and when the next hard fork or next hard forks are likely to be. Sebastian?
Yeah, I would like to, I've been trying to, also like Duncan, to kind of put this a bit here into the document in a form, right? So what I hear is that the TSC has been conducting hard fork discussions meetings is an activity. Another one is that we indicate readiness for a hard fork. And another one is like a counter, like something we are not doing, right, is deciding on the scope of a planned hard fork. So maybe it's worthwhile to point out also what we're not doing in a row on this document, right? So to kind of really say, to be clear on, yeah, it's not in our remit to actually do the decision, but we can organize such meetings when there is a call for a hard fork, whatever that means in more detail maybe, but things like that.
That's now going to have to be coordinated amongst node developers, Sebastian. So there's a need for this functionality, right?
Yeah. So maybe the TSC's role is to be what's it called? I'm missing an English word here again. It will listen for calls for hard fork in a way, and then when needed, take action and kind of, or help coordinating that, right? By conducting such meetings. This is what we feel like doing, and what we see in our action space.
Yeah, but it also needs to be involved in the scoping, and it's not just the scoping, Duncan. It's also the timing. Okay, so scope and timing go together for hard forks. I don't think you can just be reactive, Sebastian, in the new world. So you could react to the call for a hard fork if all of the node developers collectively agreed. But how do you ensure collective agreement on the hard fork? And you would absolutely need to enable discussion between. So one of the things that we're not doing at the moment, Duncan, or we haven't done historically, is to enable discussion between node developers as to the node readiness. And there might need to be a decision might need to be taken, which on the lines of, well, although node X isn't yet ready for the hard fork, the community demand for the hard fork is such that it will be necessary to proceed anyway. Okay, so there has to be some technical decision making on those lines, balancing interests, and making people suitably included. One thing we do, I didn't mention in the parties, is of course SPOs are important because they're the ones who enact the hard fork. The other party that's now important are the GRAPs. Okay, so we have to engage with the GRAPs and provide them with information, and the Constitutional Committee as well. So for the most recent hard fork, we certainly engaged with the Constitutional Committee. So there's quite detailed coordination there. I don't think we didn't engage with the GRAPs because the GRAPs didn't, or at least we didn't directly engage with the GRAPs because the GRAPs didn't have a vote on the hard fork. It was just the ICC, if I recall correctly, that had the vote, and the ICC and the SPOs. But for future hard forks, we absolutely have to set up the channels for discussion with the GRAPs. And again, we have to allow them to make an informed decision about readiness.
So I summarize this as inform SPOs and GRAPs about upcoming hard forks.
It's a bit more than that, Sebastian. You can't.
Okay, then I just want to let's expand on this a bit, right? At some point, we need to kind of stop the detail and go more into the breadth again. But I think it's helpful to kind of, what I see right now, what I feel personally is maybe a good way to kind of phrase these activities we're kind of wanting to kind of take a role on, is always like do X, right? Like.
Yeah. Okay.
Then a subject, right? And basically, this is helpful in kind of finding this ratio in the end.
So let me say why it's more than that. So part of it is information. Part of it is responding to feedback. Responding to concerns and making sure that concerns that are raised by one of the constitutional bodies are addressed by the implementers. So. For example, there were some security concerns that were identified by the community prior to the most recent hard fork. And what was necessary then was to ensure that the implementers took action that satisfied the ICC and the SPOs as to the fundamental security of the hard fork. So there's complicated interplay between. It's more than just information. It's information, but it's also taking action based on the information to ensure that there can be a successful hard fork.
Yeah,
so you can see that as information if you like. Yeah, kind of coordination.
Yeah, we can break it down further, right? And then we realize we take all the same role on informational, on risks, on concerns. We're all in the same kind of role that we are the ones who spread that. Then we can maybe summarize these roles again to say, yeah, this is our activity overall summarizing in this regards, right? But
Sure.
it's helpful to be very concrete, and I think this is it's a good exercise really to kind of drill down here, right, in a well-known process.
So one of the things that the ICC wanted us to do was to conduct a formal risk analysis of the hard fork. So we did that. We constructed a detailed risk register, which covered off the things like security risks, the implementation risks, and also the risks of not doing the hard fork. So in this case, there were for the preliminary hard fork, there were fairly significant risks if we didn't do the hard fork.
Yeah.
So that then funding could not be released to fund future development of Cardano. So you get positive and negative risks in some cases. It's not, you don't just get a risk of doing something, you get a risk of not doing something as well.
It's called an opportunity risk, right?
Opportunity risk, yeah.
So creating a risk analysis sounds like something we see in our remit.
Well, certainly something we've done before.
Is it? Yeah, exactly. So is it creating a risk analysis, or is it having somebody else do it, right? Kind of what's it called? Contracted.
Well, if you take the responsibilities, I mean, I think I would argue that we should be taking the responsibility for constructing a risk register, whether it's one of the TSC members doing it or another party. Doesn't really.
We're accountable, right, to doing a risk analysis, but we might not be responsible in actually doing it. We might be delegating that, right?
That might be delegated, yes.
And that's basically then the racy dimension, right, on this responsibility, accountability, and so on, right?
I don't want to confuse the issue further. This was actually a proposal of Neil. I had a racy originally, and he said, I think this is better, and I agreed with him. And it was I think it's a document that is floating about IOG somewhere. And it's who executes work, who makes the decisions, who's being consulted, there's a bit more granularity in there, which I think is more applicable. But look,
it makes a lot of sense to avoid repetition in the document in the end, right? But it's hard to kind of collect the original thing at first when we explore, right? Putting everything beside this key legend here is a bit kind of harder to read, right? Whether we more about activity, yes or no, right? Or then we break it down further. Then we can summarize it again using something like this. But in initial collecting, which we're currently doing, I believe, it's a bit premature optimization, I would call it.
We'll get onto that in the next step, I suppose. Right at the moment, we're still just trying to populate the list, but something to think about. It's actually why at the top here, I've called out the technical steering committee, but actually it's really important to understand the context of everyone else that we associate with and where we see the responsibilities. So, we might be involved in an activity, but someone else is actually going to make the final decision. But it's important for us to, and we can, see where that lies. But that's the next step, and maybe something for next week, if hopefully.
So this would mean moving the verbs out of the first column into the actual label we put right in the other column. So basically, the kind of activity is kind of decided by the cell entry, right? The label we give, whereas only the domain, the subject, is basically in the first column. And counter to this, I have been tracking hard fork coordination now and breaking this down into individual activities just from listening to Kevin, which I would still be doing if you ask for me to kind of fill in this whole document, right? I would be doing that first, and then I would basically make this maybe according to a scheme you need.
Absolutely, that's the second step. I just want to highlight that because it's I didn't do so earlier. But look, what we've been doing here for hard fork, like teasing out, well, what does that mean? And even things, sometimes it's helpful, things that we're maybe not responsible for can also go in there if we really believe that we're, if we're not responsible for ensuring payments to suppliers, that is also helpful to call out that that's not our responsibility, to use an obvious example. But I don't know, has this been helpful to, I wonder if maybe I might do a one-to-one call with some of the people that haven't been able to be on this session, and just try. I'm very keen that there's a lot of discussion that's been happening for weeks, but we need to get it written down. We need to formalize it, and it needs to be in a form that's, you know, fairly digestible. So I want to give this a go.
Okay,
So maybe.
So is that the kind of detail you wanted for the Harport working group, Duncan?
That's a good one, yeah. Maybe we pause there and try another one, which might be around. Let's do parameter changes. That's something that's fairly well established, isn't it? So, and we've been discussing as well with the L parameter. So actually, can we maybe make some notes on that?
Yeah, I was going to let Alex speak to that, but he's just left the.
Yeah, and I need to leave also in a very moment.
Sure.
May I just, like, you probably will give us an action to now all elected members should kind of do an exercise here synchronously until next week or in 2 weeks or so. And for me, I think the level of detail as I've been creating these few lines 12 to 18 right now works well. I hope this goes also in the right direction. And for me, each line would be either yes, maybe no, and I will be free. I feel free to kind of adding similar lines in the document now. And I think if that works for you, and then maybe we can ask that from others too, we start gathering concrete things at least.
Yep, perfect. That's a great first step. And then, as we say, the next one, if we have the list, we can then start to go through it, and sort of maybe we go through a very quick series of votes saying who agrees with it, and if it's agreed, we move on, and if it's not, we sit and have the discussion about what responsibility we have, something like that.
I mean, by putting the columns, yes, no, whatever, we see consensus written down, right? We just need to say, do we all agree that this is the final vote of what you have on this? All good, all or nothing. You have had a chance to kind of put your vote asynchronously, right?
Okay,
perfect.
So for the parameter changes, I've remembered that I produced a document that described how parameter changes were processed by the parameter committee. That was done about September this year, I think. Okay. So if someone can dig that out. So we had two documents. One was the normal situation, the present normal situation, and one was the emergency process, Duncan.
Okay.
Okay. So I think we actually had that documented as
great. Well, I'll try and find that then, take that as an action. I'll put the steps in and highlight where the TSC fitted into that, and we can then review it and check that that's still all applicable.
Yeah, but essentially the process involved the parameter committee undertaking discussion, making a recommendation, and then passing it up to the TSC for approval and action. So constructing the on-chain action that followed from the parameter change, and ensuring that Intersect put it on chain.
Yep. And
then, of course, the final decision on whether the change happens or not is up to the DREPs and SPOs, and okay. The ICC.
Shall we wrap up there then? We have lost people at quite a prolific rate. Congratulations to the four of you for managing to hang into this late stage. And I'll put out a call for everybody to have their say with this. I'll assume that if we don't hear anything, they're happy to just review the output. And meanwhile, where I can find other pieces of information like that, I'll start to populate the list. And next week we can look to run through it. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Good.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.